Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I chair a current IOM committee that's tasked with issuing a report on responsible sharing of clinical trial data. We issued a preliminary report in January, which looks like this, and I'll at the end show you how to download it. And I'll leave some copies at front, and actually addresses some of the issues that I'll just be covering in a very high view today. As with any IOM study, I really need to thank the staff, several of whom are here today, Leanne Olson, Rebecca Lenzi, and Michelle Mancher. Thank you all. It wouldn't have been possible without your dedicated work. I know you're talking about data sharing generally. Our committee is tasked only with clinical trial data sharing. I just wanted to sort of say a couple of words about why I think this is an important issue in environmental health. I know a lot of your studies are not interventional clinical trials, but I think they would be desirable, particularly to help you assess the effectiveness and safety of community-level interventions. I chaired a former IOM study that whose sort of genesis was the Kennedy Krieger lead abatement study, a clinical trial that was extremely controversial, but I think could have had important data. I want to pose to you the question of whether clinical trials and environmental health studies, do they differ from clinical trials in other areas, particularly small molecule drugs that we tend to think about? And if so, please give us your ideas, because the final report is not being issued till the fall. We're deliberating and really want feedback from people who've thought, as you all have, about their own fields. Which I'm not sure where I'm pointing this at. Where am I supposed to be pointing this to get to? I've tried to advance the slide. But point it. Yeah, I know, but what do I direct it to? Just press.
Just press.
It's not moving.
Okay, I'm going
to. Okay, I'll just ask you to. Thank you. So I just want to summarize briefly the charge for the committee for the interim report. And that's to develop guiding principles and a framework for discussion for the responsible sharing of clinical trials data. We did not issue findings, conclusions, recommendations. That comes in the report later. The next slide, please. For the final report, our charge is to analyze the benefits, challenges, and risks of various models of data sharing and to make recommendations to enhance the responsible sharing of clinical trial data. So we need your input on these questions. On the next slide. We did lay out some provisional guiding principles. These are very high-level principles, and our next task is to kind of bring them down to actually the details of how we might actually set up clinical trial data sharing. So we want to respect individual participants whose data are shared. We want to maximize benefits to participants in clinical trials and to society while minimizing harms, and obviously issues of informed consent, privacy, and confidentiality are going to be key here. Earlier on today, you talked about trials that have been completed versus trials going forward. What do you do with clinical trials where the original consent didn't mention clinical trial data sharing, or said it was possible only to other researchers in the same institution? As a guiding principle, we think we need to increase public trust in clinical trials, i.e. the trustworthiness of clinical trials. And we want to carry out sharing of clinical trial data in a manner that enhances fairness. And we could spend a day debating fairness to whom, in what sense, and so forth. On the next slide. We also suggested operational considerations, which we think may be a next step down in terms of practical guidance. We thought it might be useful, and we throw this out for feedback. Do we want to think about the timing of when data are shared? Do we want to pay attention to proportionality in terms of the risks, benefits, and burdens to various parties who are going to be affected, various stakeholders in clinical trials, the researchers, the participants, the sponsors, the public? If we have a system for sharing clinical trial data, or systems, many different centers may be doing this, Should we embed, the favorite IOM phrase is make it a learning system where we collect data on how things are working, benefits, risks, adverse consequences, and feed it back. Next slide, I'm going to start running really quickly before I say I'm colorblind. I'm not. Next slide. Someone asked in the last panel, what are data? Okay? What do we mean by data? We say share data, clinical trial data. What do we mean? Well, do we mean raw data? Do we mean raw data that's been sort of computed, analyzed to provide endpoints, cleaned, closed, locked? So if you get a final cleaned, locked data set, we were told a lot of that never makes the publication. There is an analytic data set for the paper you publish. You may want to make different parts of this slide available to different people at different times. That's a question I would like to pose. We've posed to the people who read the report. Next slide. Got a clock. Metadata are important. For each data sharing element or activity, there are questions we pose. What types of data will be shared? Who should be providing data for sharing? Who should be the recipients of the shared data? When in the life of clinical trial will data be shared? And how will it be shared? Some people say open access, put it up on the web like the genomic scientists do. Other people say, no, it's got to be controlled. Maybe you have to be a genomic scientist. Can anybody get a hold of clinical trial data? Only investigators with a specific pre-specified hypothesis? Questions. Next slide. Got to run here. Next slide. Oh, okay, that's fine. So we posed a series of questions which are on the previous slide, which I'm not going to go back to. We really want feedback on these questions. So those of you who have the knowledge that's in this room, please let us know. The next slide does show you the contact information for Rebecca Lenzi, who's our program officer in the next slide. And there's a website where you can download copies of this to give to everybody in your organization. And as I say, I'll leave a few of them at the table in front. Thanks very much.